July 13, 1943, dusk descends across the Sicilian coast. The sun bleeds red and amber across the Mediterranean, casting long shadows across a tactical command tent position to miles. Inland from the beach at Geller, the air is thick with salt spray and the acrid smell of cordite, the remnants of 3 days of continuous bombardment. Inside, two men stand before a map table, their silhouettes framed against the canvas walls now illuminated by the dying light filtering through the seams. Outside, the distant rumble of artillery echoes across the plain. Jeeps pass by, their engines laboring under the weight of ammunition and supplies. Soldiers move with the peculiar exhaustion that comes from 3 days without rest, their uniforms stained with the dust and sweat of amphibious assault. The smell of coffee and cigarette smoke mingles with the metallic tang of weapons and oil. This is the smell of modern warfare, industrial, relentless, democratic in its violence. One man in the tent stands with his arms crossed, his jaw set. His face bears the sharp angles of a man who has calculated everything: the supply lines, the casualty projections, the logistical requirements for moving 45,000 men across an island they barely know. He is Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, commander of the 2nd Corps, a man whose reputation rests not on dramatic flourish, but on competence, on the careful husbandry of human life, on doing the difficult mathematics of war without complaint. Bradley is a man who listens more than he speaks, a man who, in his engineering mind, sees warfare as a problem to be solved systematically, with precision. He is thinking about how to hold his men together, how to advance without throwing them away like poker chips on a reckless gamble. The other man paces. His movements are sharp, economical, controlled, the movements of a predator. His jaw clenches and unclenches. His hand instinctively touches the pearl-handled revolver at his hip, not a weapon, but a symbol. General George S. Patton Jr. is a man who does not calculate in the same way. He calculates in pictures, in visions, in the possibility of the dramatic maneuver. His mind races ahead, 3 moves ahead, like a chess master playing 10 games simultaneously. He sees the prize Messina, the port city that sits at the northeastern tip of Sicily like a golden apple. He sees himself arriving there first, ahead of the British, ahead of Montgomery. And he sees something else that troubles him more deeply. He sees the opportunity slipping away. The momentum that he has worked so hard to build now about to be given to someone else. The tension between these 2 men is not new. It began months earlier in Tunisia, when Patton commanded the 2nd Corps, and Bradley served as his subordinate. Then Patton was the teacher and Bradley the student. The experienced cavalryman with his breeding and his certainties about speed and aggression and the need to keep the enemy off balance. Bradley, by contrast, was an infantry school instructor, a man who had never heard a shot fired in anger before North Africa, a man who believed in systems, in the written doctrine, in the careful application of principles. But the campaign in Sicily has changed something fundamental. 3 weeks of hard fighting in the hills of North Africa had transformed Bradley. He had proven himself capable. The 1st and 9th Infantry Divisions under his corps command had held their lines, consolidated their positions, and demonstrated the kind of methodical excellence that wins campaigns. Meanwhile, Patton's own reputation had taken on a darker hue. There was the incident with the airborne troops. There was the criticism that he lacked discipline. And perhaps most troublingly, there was Eisenhower's cold attitude. Eisenhower, the supreme commander, had dressed Patton down like a scolded schoolboy. Patton, for all his victories, sensed that he was expendable. What neither man knows as they stand in this tent, that what would not become clear until months later is that they are about to be separated. Bradley will be given command of a full army group. Patton will be sidelined, sent to England, used as a decoy in a massive deception operation. The war in Europe will continue without him for months. But on this evening in Sicily, with the smell of gunpowder still fresh, and the operation barely 3 days old, neither man knows this yet. What they do know is the situation before them. The island of Sicily stretches before them like a complex military problem. To the northeast lies Messina, the objective. Montgomery's British 8th Army has landed in the southeastern corner and is pushing northward. But the terrain is brutal. Mount Etna rises 10,900 feet into the sky, a natural fortress that dominates the northeastern quarter of the island. The road network is sparse, mountain passes are narrow, and every German soldier willing to die in the defense of the high ground. The original plan called for Bradley's the Second Corps to drive northward directly, cutting across the center of the island, then wheeling east toward Messina. This would cut off the German retreat. It would be the encirclement that wins the campaign. Trap the enemy, eliminate him on the island, prevent any evacuation. But 2 days ago, everything changed. Alexander, the overall commander, the man both Patton and Bradley technically served, made a decision. He changed the army boundary line. Route 124, the main road northward, was reassigned to Montgomery's British 8th Army. This was catastrophic for Bradley's plans. This was, in fact, more than that. It was a public humiliation. It was London's way of saying that they did not trust American troops. Bradley had heard the explanation from Patton just days earlier. Patton, standing in this very tent, had delivered the news with as much grace as he could muster. Alexander's staff had been firm. The Germans were formidable. The Americans, in their last campaign in Tunisia, had been overrun at Kasserine Pass. Montgomery was not confident in American discipline. Therefore, the main effort would be with the British. The Americans would support. The Americans would occupy a secondary role. Bradley had wanted to rage against it. Every principle of military logic screamed that the decision was wrong. The Americans were fresher. The Americans had momentum. The Americans were in the right place at the right time. But Bradley did not rage. Instead, he had absorbed the order, reoriented his course, and prepared for a holding action. He would drive his men northward toward a secondary objective. He would advance methodically, clearing German positions, taking the hills, consolidating the ground. It was not the maneuver he wanted, but it was the maneuver he had been given, and Bradley would execute it with his usual competence. Patton, however, was not a man who accepted such things without response. Patton had requested permission from Alexander to advance westward toward Palermo, Sicily's capital. The request was unusual. Palermo was not a key military objective. It had no strategic importance for the offensive toward Messina. But Palermo was on the coast. Palermo was a major city. Palermo was the kind of prize that would demonstrate that Patton's 7th Army was doing something significant while the British took the main effort against the Germans. Alexander had granted the permission. Within 72 hours, Patton's forces under Major General Lucien Truscott had covered 100 miles of brutal mountain terrain and thrown the Germans into confusion. On July 22nd, the 3rd Infantry Division had entered Palermo to scenes of jubilation. Sicilian civilians had poured into the streets, throwing flowers, embracing American soldiers, declaring their gratitude. Mussolini fell on the same day. The strategic momentum had shifted. The headlines were no longer about German victories or American caution. The headlines were about American lightning strikes into enemy territory. But now, as Patton paces in this tent in late July or early August, the excitement of the Palermo victory has been eclipsed by something more troubling. New orders are coming, new directives from above. Something about amphibious landings, something about end runs around German positions, something that Bradley opposes with every fiber of his being. And Patton senses this opposition, senses that Bradley, once his subordinate, once his student, is now challenging him, is now, in effect, saying that Patton's vision is reckless, that his plans are dangerous, that they will waste the lives of American soldiers in pursuit of glory that has no military value. The 157th Regimental Combat Team is being pulled from reserve, Patton announces, not looking at Bradley directly, but addressing the map as though the map itself is his subordinate. I've arranged with Cunningham for landing craft. We'll conduct an amphibious operation at Brolo. His voice is controlled, but there is an edge to it, a tension barely contained. 2nd Battalion will land behind the German defensive line. We'll cut them off. We'll collapse their entire flank. Bradley does not respond immediately. He continues to study the map. His fingers trace the coastal road, the road called the Via Nazionale, that runs along the northern coast of Sicily, climbing and descending as it follows the contours of the cliffs. It is the main German escape route. It is also, Bradley has calculated, a death trap for any force that tries to land behind it without proper support. The terrain is too rocky. The beaches are too small. The German artillery positioned on the heights above will have a clear field of fire. A landing force will be trapped on those beaches like men in a bucket. Target practice for any competent officer of artillery. How long will the 15th and 7th Infantry take to reach Brolo overland? Bradley asks, still not looking at Patton. His voice is steady, calculated, the voice of a man who is asking the question because he already knows what the answer means. He knows that the 15th Infantry has been fighting in the hills. He knows that they are exhausted. He knows that the terrain will slow them. He knows that they will not reach Brolo in time to provide support for the landing force. He knows all of this because he has done the calculations. He has studied the maps. He has talked to the divisional commanders. They'll make good time, Patton says. But his voice is less certain now. He senses where Bradley is going with this. 48 hours? Bradley asks, perhaps the landing craft can only be offloaded in darkness. Bradley continues, his voice now taking on the quality of a tutor explaining a mathematical principle to a student who is struggling to understand. The beaches are only 200 yards deep before they hit the rock outcrops. The Germans hold the heights. You'll have at most 30 soldiers per boat before the boats have to withdraw. If our infantry doesn't arrive, the Germans are collapsing. Patton interrupts, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. Their lines are failing. They're pulling back across the entire front. This operation will shatter what's left of their cohesion. They'll have to evacuate. Bradley finally looks at Patton. In his eyes is not anger, but something colder, a kind of clinical disappointment. The Germans have established a defense in depth. They're using the terrain masterfully. They're extracting their forces in a controlled withdrawal. They're not collapsing, sir. They're evacuating. There's a difference. He pauses, lets the words settle. An amphibious landing in that location, without proper support, will result in the destruction of the 157th Regiment or its capture. We'll lose a full regiment for no military gain. Patton's face darkens. His jaw clenches. His hand instinctively moves toward his revolver. In that gesture unconscious, reflexive lies the essential difference between these two men. Patton solves problems through force, through will, through the assertion of dominance. Bradley solves problems through analysis. The 157th will land at Brolo, Patton says, his voice now ice cold. The operation will proceed. That is my decision as commander of 7th Army. Then the 157th will be sacrificed, Bradley responds, and there is no anger in his voice, which somehow makes it more devastating. He's simply stating a fact, the way an engineer might note that a bridge built without proper supports will inevitably collapse. Sir, I request that this operation be cancelled or postponed until we can guarantee adequate ground support. Your request is noted and denied. Patton says, there is a silence then. The kind of silence that descends between two men who have reached the limits of their ability to communicate with each other. Bradley returns his attention to the map. He will obey the order. He will begin moving his divisions toward Brolo to provide what support he can. He will allocate assets that might be better used elsewhere. He will, in short, do his duty. But in that silence is the death knell of something that once existed between them. The mentorship is over. The student is no longer willing to trust the teacher. The teacher has made a decision that the student believes is fundamentally wrong. Patton senses this, senses the rupture, and something in him breaks. Because deep down, beneath all the bluster and the aggression and the need for glory, Patton knows that Bradley is right. He knows that the operation is risky. He knows that lives will be lost. But he also knows something else, something that Bradley, with all his careful calculations, cannot understand. He knows that Eisenhower is looking for reasons to relieve him. He knows that the British are whispering doubts about American capabilities. He knows that if he does not produce victories dramatic, undeniable victories, he will be sent home. He will be relegated to a training command or a supply depot. He will be, in effect, discarded, and there is something else, something deeper. Patton has experienced the heat of battle in ways that Bradley has not. Patton has seen the paralysis that comes when soldiers are afraid. He has seen men freeze in the face of danger. He has seen units dissolve into chaos. He has concluded, rightly or wrongly, that what soldiers need is not careful planning but audacity. They need to know that their commander believes so completely in victory that he will take risks that should, by all logic, result in failure and yet somehow succeed. They need to be knocked off balance by the sheer aggressive will of their leader. Bradley, by contrast, believes that what soldiers need is competence. They need to know that their officer has done the mathematics correctly, that he will not waste their lives, that he cares for them as individuals and not merely as units of military force. Bradley's soldiers are willing to fight because they trust him. Patton's soldiers fight because they fear what will happen if they do not. But there is a cost to Patton's philosophy. There is a weight that accumulates the weight of the soldiers who are killed in unnecessary operations. The weight of the unit that is destroyed so that photographs can be taken for the newspapers. The weight of the casualty reports that must be filed. The weight of the letters that must be written to the mothers and wives and girlfriends of the men who have been sacrificed on the altar of a general's ambition. Patton is not a sadist. He is not indifferent to suffering, but he has compartmentalized it. He has trained himself to believe that his ambitions are synonymous with his country's interests. He has convinced himself that if he must choose between the life of one soldier and the destruction of 20 Germans, the choice is obvious. What he has not allowed himself to fully grasp is that sometimes the choice is not between victory and defeat, but between a victory now and a smaller victory later. Sometimes the careful plan saves more lives than the bold gambit. Even if the careful plan seems less dramatic, Bradley is about to learn that he cannot stop Patton through reason. Patton is already committed. The decision has been made. The 157th will land at Brolo. The operation will proceed, and soldiers will die. That is what Bradley is thinking as he stands in this tent, watching Patton's face darken, watching the internal struggle playing out behind those intense blue eyes. That is what Bradley is feeling, not anger, but a profound sadness, a recognition that he and Patton are operating from fundamentally different assumptions about what warfare demands of a commander. "Sir," Bradley says finally, his voice now carrying a note of something like supplication, "I understand your concerns about momentum, about maintaining the initiative, but I would ask you to reconsider. The 157th is a good regiment. The men in that regiment have fought well. They deserve better than to be sent to a beach where they will be massacred." Patton stares at the map. He does not respond. His silence is its own kind of answer. The decision stands. The operation will proceed. What Bradley does not know, what neither of them knows, is that history will judge this moment harshly. The Brolo landing will take place on August 8th. It will be defended fiercely by the Germans and imperfectly supported by Bradley's overextended infantry. And yet, almost miraculously, it will succeed. The Germans will withdraw. The Allies will advance. The military objective will be achieved. Patton's audacity will be vindicated, but the vindication will be incomplete, because the same Axis forces that were supposedly collapsing at Brolo will not actually collapse. They will extract themselves methodically, in good order, losing far fewer men than anyone had expected. By August 17th, when the Americans finally reach Messina, they will discover that upwards of 120,000 German and Italian troops have already evacuated to the Italian mainland. The amphibious operations, for all their drama and daring, will not have accomplished the one thing they were designed to accomplish: the destruction or capture of the Axis army. Patton will arrive in Messina victorious. Photographers will capture him greeting the arriving British forces. His name will be in the newspapers. The 7th Army will be credited with a triumph, but it will be a hollow victory. The strategic objective to trap and eliminate the Axis army on Sicily will have been lost. The long, grinding war in Italy that follows, the bloodbaths at Salerno and Anzio and Monte Cassino, will come in part because those 120,000 German troops made it across the straits, and Bradley will have been right all along. The careful advance, the methodical pressure, the refusal to gamble with American lives, it would have been the smarter strategy. It would have achieved more. It would have killed fewer soldiers, but it would not have made headlines. It would not have produced the dramatic victory that Patton needed to ensure his continuation in command. Instead, what will happen is something different. What will happen is the slapping incidents. On August 3rd and again on August 10th, Patton will visit field hospitals and will strike to soldiers whom he believes are malingerers. He will interpret their exhaustion as cowardice. He will attempt to shame them back into fighting. The incidents will become known to Eisenhower. Eisenhower will force Patton to apologize. And in the court of public opinion, the question will no longer be whether Patton is a great general. That question will be replaced by whether he is a fit officer for command. In essence, Patton will win the battle for Messina and lose the war for his career. Bradley, by contrast, will continue his methodical ascent. He will be given command of the 1st Army for the Normandy invasion. He will eventually command the 12th Army Group. He will become, in the end, the greater general, not because he is bolder, but because he understands something that Patton never quite grasped, that in modern warfare, the logistics of support matter more than the drama of maneuver, that lives matter, that soldiers who are cared for fight better than soldiers who are driven, that victory without understanding the cost is not victory at all. But on this evening in Sicily, none of this has happened yet. Patton still believes he can secure his future through audacity. Bradley still believes he can appeal to reason. And between them lies the question that defines the American way of warfare and World War II. Can we win through sheer abundance and aggressive action? Or must we win through careful planning and conservation of force? The answer, paradoxically, is both. The Americans will win World War II not because they are more aggressive than the Germans, but because they have more of everything. More factories, more soldiers, more landing craft, more fuel, more ammunition, and more importantly, an underlying assumption that all men's lives have value, that soldiers are not expendable, that even when you have numerical superiority, you should not waste it recklessly, that efficiency and care go hand in hand. This is the democratic ideal made manifest in warfare. This is what separates the American army from the armies of the totalitarian powers. The Nazis, with their ideology of racial superiority and the expendability of human beings in service of the state, will sacrifice soldiers with callous indifference. The Japanese will send soldiers on suicide missions, believing that death in service of the emperor is the highest honor. But the Americans will argue about whether to risk 157 soldiers in an amphibious landing. The Americans will care about casualty rates. The Americans will attempt to minimize loss, and in that caring, in that fundamental assumption that a soldier's life has intrinsic value and should be protected whenever possible, lies something more important than any individual victory. There lies the reason why the Allies will win, why democracy will triumph over authoritarianism, why the light will finally break through the darkness that has descended over Europe. Patton, standing in this tent on the evening of August 1st or August 7th or August 13th, 1943, does not understand this. Or perhaps he understands it intellectually but cannot fully accept it emotionally. He still believes that his vision is more important than the lives of the soldiers under his command. He still believes that there are victories that justify any cost. He still believes that history will remember him for his daring, not his discretion. Bradley, by contrast, understands something deeper. He understands that the real victory in this war will not belong to the general who takes the most impressive city or produces the most dramatic maneuver. The real victory will belong to the general who brings his soldiers home alive. The general who looks at the casualty figures and tries to reduce them. The general who cannot sleep at night knowing that he has sacrificed men unnecessarily. The Americans will have both kinds of generals. They will have Patton's aggressive brilliance and Bradley's methodical competence. And somehow, through some miracle of American industrial capacity and democratic values, They will combine these opposing approaches into a military machine that overwhelms all opposition. But the future belongs to Bradley, not to Patton. This moment, this collision in a tent in Sicily marks the precise point where the future shifts. Bradley is becoming the equal of Patton. Soon, he will become the superior. As the sun sets completely over the Mediterranean, the tent grows darker. Soldiers outside light cigarettes and build small fires to ward off the chill of the Sicilian night. Somewhere in the distance, a German artillery piece fires once, then falls silent. The war continues, indifferent to the conversation that has just taken place between two American generals. The Brolo landing will happen. The 157th Regiment will land on the beaches in darkness. They will suffer casualties. They will achieve their objective. The operation that Bradley opposed will, in a narrow military sense, succeed. And yet it will also fail, because the larger objective, the destruction of the Axis army, will elude the Allies. Slipping away across the Straits of Messina in the pre-dawn hours of August 17th, this is the paradox of the Sicily campaign. It is a victory in which both men are proved partially right and partially wrong. Patton's audacity achieves tactical results, but fails at the strategic level. Bradley's caution preserves American lives, but does not prevent the enemy's escape. In the end, the campaign demonstrates something that both men will spend the rest of the war learning: that military victory is not a simple matter of bold maneuver or careful planning. It is the interplay of both the careful planning that enables bold maneuvers, the bold maneuvering that doesn't negate careful thought, and there is a larger truth beyond even this. Because in the end, World War II will be won not by the most brilliant general or the most audacious commander. It will be won by a democracy that values human life even when prosecuting war. It will be won by a nation that has the resources to both sacrifice bravely and to protect carefully. It will be won by soldiers who fight not because they are driven by fear or fanaticism, but because they believe in something larger than themselves, the principle that all men deserve to be free. On the beaches of Sicily in July 1943, American soldiers are fighting and dying. Some will be remembered in history, most will be forgotten, but all of them are part of something vast, something that will reshape the world. They are the ones who will make possible the liberation of Europe. They are the ones who will defeat the tyranny that has consumed the continent. They are the ones who will ensure that democracy survives, and between them, between the soldiers fighting in the dust and the darkness, two generals are learning hard lessons about the nature of command. Patton will learn, too late, that audacity without wisdom is merely recklessness. Bradley will learn that caution without courage achieves nothing. And together, despite their profound differences, they will help build an army that is capable of unprecedented feats. The Sicilian campaign will end on August 17, 1943. The Americans will reach Messina first. The newspapers will declare it a triumph. Patton will accept the praise with satisfaction. Bradley will continue his quiet work, his unassuming competence, his care for the soldiers under his command, and the war will grind on, into Italy, into France, into Germany itself. Two generals, united in opposition, will struggle across the landscape of Europe, trying to apply their different philosophies to the vast, complex, terrible reality of modern warfare. In the end, both will be vindicated and both will be proved insufficient. Because the truth about warfare is that it belongs to neither the bold nor the careful alone. It belongs to the complex interplay between them, to the tension between daring and prudence, to the eternal human struggle between the desire for glory and the need for wisdom. This is what the Sicily campaign teaches, if we are willing to listen. This is what the meeting between Patton and Bradley, one fierce and demanding, the other quiet and thoughtful, reveals about the American character, our capacity for both boldness and care, for both aggression and compassion, for both the pursuit of victory and the preservation of the human beings who make victory possible. The soldiers on those beaches in July 1943 embodied both aspects. They were audacious and careful, brave and cautious, willing to risk everything and yet hoping to survive. They were, in short, American soldiers, products of a democracy that somehow managed to forge, in the crucible of the greatest war in human history, something never before seen in the annals of military science, an army that was both effective and humane, victorious and merciful, dominant and restrained. This is their triumph. This is their legacy. Not merely the cities liberated or the enemy defeated, but the demonstration that a free people, properly armed and properly led, can defeat tyranny without becoming tyrannical themselves. That victory is possible without the sacrifice of morality. That courage does not require cruelty. That strength can be tempered with compassion. The meeting between Patton and Bradley, one evening in Sicily in August 1943, is a small moment in a vast war, but it contains within it something essential about the American experience in that war: the constant tension between different approaches to the problem of violence, the eternal conversation between bold action and careful thought, the ongoing struggle to apply the principles of democracy in the context of total war. And in that struggle lies not merely military victory, but something infinitely more valuable: the preservation of what makes America worth fighting for in the first place.